President Bola Tinubu, chair of ECOWAS, has hailed the deepening economic partnership between Africa and China. At the opening ceremony of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in Beijing, Tinubu highlighted the exponential growth in trade between the two regions, now estimated at $280 billion, addressing an audience that included African and Chinese leaders, as well as UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Tinubu emphasized the importance of continued cooperation in trade, investment, and cultural exchange, despite global challenges. The ECOWAS chairman describes the partnership as grounded in mutual respect, sovereignty, and non-interference. He underscored that China's Belt and Road Initiative aligns closely with Africa's infrastructure goals under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, offering new opportunities for economic growth.
Cultural entertainment and display of diversity in excellence in learning and collaboration. Thank you very much. It is with a great joy and pleasure that I stand before you today, celebrating the remarkable partnership between Africa and China. A bond that has not only endured, but has grown stronger since its inception in the early 50s. This relationship has transcended continents, challenges, and become a true testament to the power of mutual respect and cooperation. One began as a China support for African nations' independence, has evolved into a rich, multifaceted partnership spanning trade, investment, and diplomacy. Over years of our ties, we have been solidified. We share through high-level engagement, strategic agreement, and a shared vision of growth. Today, we gather to reflect on the progress we've made and chart the course.
Joining us now on this show is Professor Ufem Ubi, Associate Professor and the Acting Director of Research and Studies at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. Professor Ubi, good morning, and thank you for joining us on the morning show.
Thank you, Dr. Ruben Ambati, for having me on your show.
Well, Professor Ubi, let's start first by talking about how important this forum for China-African cooperation is. We're told trade is up to about $280 billion now between China and Africa. President Xi Jinping has promised an additional $50 billion to Africa in terms of aid, and President Tinubu is full of praise for this forum and its objectives, which he says align with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Your viewpoint.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Abati, for the question. And in fact, as a matter of fact, FOCAC has come to stay. FOCAC has remained an unprecedented cooperative mechanism between China and countries in Africa. And the most important thing I would like to say is how well countries in Africa are maximizing the benefit of FOCAC or the benefit of the relationship. Well, over the years, since the establishment of FOCAC in 2000 and the signing of the strategic partnership between China and African countries, the relationship has grown transcendentally In fact, like President Xi Jinping mentioned in his speech at the 9th FOCAC, he said our relationship has transcended spatio-temporal parameters. What that means is our relationship has transcended time and space. And so if you look at the areas and sectors that we have over the years cooperated with China, you find out that, like you said in your earlier statement, the trade has grown between China and Africa has grown over, as of 2023, it was 285 billion. And if you have to trickle down to Nigeria, I think Nigeria is the third largest trading partner with China. Our trade has grown above 22.1 billion. And so there are prospects in terms of infrastructure. If you look around Africa, you see the infrastructural footprints, from China. Even in Nigeria here, you see the light rail, the blue, the red line that the Chinese enterprises or companies are building. If you go to East Africa, you see the Mombasa Railway, that is supposed to connect Eastern African, with regards to the Johannesburg FOCAC plan of action, which talked about connectivity, which means we are going to connect between, there's going to be connections between the aviation, the rail, and the road transport networks. And so that is actually supposed to boost intra-African trade. As you mentioned, it's supposed to align with the African Continental Free Trade Area. And so much more importantly, over the years, with each plan of action that has been published and sent out, it has also shown that we have to also take into consideration other areas like technology, science and tech. But importantly, the 2024 FOCAC, what is so important about this FOCAC is that it raised important issues and areas that were never before discussed in the other FOCAC meetings. And this has to do with modernization. It has to do with green energy, green technology, climate change issues, although that has always been mentioned. But this time, it's much more about adaptation, innovation, and resilience, that the country, China, and countries in Africa can work together to achieve. Poverty alleviation, too, is part of all the discourse that has been ongoing. And a lot of countries in Africa today are actually positioned to harness the benefits of the Forum on China-African Cooperation. And like our president said, the meeting and the forum itself aligns with our own reforms, ongoing within the country. And so I think, much importantly, we should look at how we can maximize the benefit from that organization, for the benefit of our countries, the benefit of Nigeria, benefit of other African countries. There are a lot of issues that are being discussed. The GSI, which is the Global Security Initiative, the GDI, the Global Development Initiative, the modernization that is ongoing, and lessons we could learn from all this, from China. So I think there are a whole lot of prospects in terms of all the sectors I've mentioned and the ones I've not mentioned. As we go further, maybe we'll discuss.
Thank you, Professor Ubi, for highlighting some of these prospects. But of course, the question is...
Hello?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right, okay. So we'll come back to Professor Ufem and Ubi, Associate Professor and Acting Director of Research and Studies Department at the NIIA. Before he comes back, just highlighting some of the things that Nigeria seeks to benefit from this Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC. He's talked about some of the investments in roads, infrastructure, agriculture. Also, I believe highlighted some of the climate change concerns which had been talked about, and critics had said that perhaps China is not paying enough attention to the impact on the environment on some of the activities on the African continent.
Well, but the question I address is that, look, Nigeria is not even taking full benefit of the relationship with China. Look, I mentioned the company earlier on, Heda Sinopec. After President Buhari went there, they were in charge of about 4 of our assets in the oil sector. Sinopec eventually left Nigeria under circumstances that that still remain very easy. There's another company that was in charge of Mambila Hydro. Now, Nigeria over-politicized Mambila Hydro such that all kinds of persons got involved, and there was a lot of, a lot of confusion about what was going on in that particular project. It was on the basis of that I was now saying some of these MOUs that they have signed, there's something they call a brass methanol, one of the MOUs that they are signing. The issue would be about the Nigerian government being consistent so that, the Chinese, the way they behave, they are better organized than us. And that's why I was saying when the African leaders go there, it should not just be conference. They should open their eyes and see how an organized society is run so that they can come and replicate the same thing in their own countries in Africa. So signing those MOUs, the opportunities, Chinese businesses coming to Africa or Nigeria, cultural exchanges that the Chinese are talking about, that's not the difficult part. The difficult part is how these African leaders process those things. And the money that they collect, the aid that they collect, what they do with it, accountability. So we also have a responsibility, not just to celebrate, they are giving us $50 billion. What do we do with the aid that we receive? Why is Djibouti in trouble? Why is Kenya running up and down, to see how it can pay its debts? Why is Zambia trapped in Chinese debt diplomacy? So these are some of the issues, in my view. It's very easy to sign MOU, can sign MOU. Look at the situation in Ogun State. It's about lack of consistency in terms of following up on our established agreements, under this same, relationship with China that we are all excited about.
So true.
I completely agree with you. People we do business with will always take advantage of what they see as loopholes or advantages in our system that will benefit them. And I love that we're talking about Kenya, we're talking about Zambia, because when you also look at those examples, they're also having problems with the IMF and the World Bank. They're defaulting it. They're trying to restructure their debt. So it now still comes back to what we're doing internally. What is our accountability mechanisms? Are we dealing with corruption? Are we structured in how, when, like Dr. Abati said earlier, when these MOUs are signed, are they being implemented? Are they being executed? Money changes hands up front. If you look at the Ogun State case, money changed hands, but I believe our guest is back, and yes, Ayo, you're in the middle of your question.
Yes, we have Professor Ufem and Ubi back with us. Thanks a lot again, Professor, for joining us this morning. So, having highlighted some of the benefits of this summit that's happening in China, today's the last day, 6th of September. The question for me is, number one, what's in it for China? Because, of course, we know that it's not because they are very generous, they want to help African nations, so they want to give us, aid and invest in Africa. And then that thing that's in it for them, what's the true cost of it for African nations? Is it a fair deal for us?
Thank you for this beautiful question. It takes me back to a lot of invitations I've had to come discuss China-African relations or discuss Nigerian-China relations. In many of those situations, what people ask me to come discuss is what is China's interest in Africa, or what is China's expanding role in Africa. And the reverse is what I always start with. I say, why do we have to discuss what is China's interest in Africa, or why do we have to discuss Chinese expansive role in Africa? Why don't we look at what is Africa's interest in China's expansion or China's influx into Africa? Or why can't we look at, let me be specific now, Nigeria's interest in this expanding role of China in Africa? I said, it is high time that African countries will begin to understand what international politics is, and with regards to all the facets of international relations like international trade, international cooperation, transactions and negotiations. In fact, it is what we negotiate for is what we get. And so this is where we begin in the new form of engagement in the 21st century, with advanced and industrialized powers. And so People look at China's expansion into Africa from a very negative perspective, and some people also look at it from a positive perspective. Well, there are also there are negativities and there are the positive aspect of this relationship. But I would like to say that much more importantly, we should look at what we can benefit from this relationship, what we can maximize. Of course, you know, we are not industrialized. Many African countries, as a matter of fact, all African countries are not industrialized. We are just a commodity market, commodity producers. Why can't we, you know, try to industrialize, advance our science and tech in such a way that we could add value to our resources and export, you know? That will create a lot of income. As a matter of fact, it will add to the GDP of countries in Africa. And so one of the area of engagement should be asking for the transfer of technology. Right, I know sometimes people will argue you cannot, the technology is not given to you free, but you have to acquire it. You have to, if possible, let me use the conventional word, steal technology. Industrialization is key. Now, if you look at the process of Chinese modernization, it took them 100 years to get to where they are. In fact, it started in 1926. And so African countries should learn from the Chinese experience. I am not saying, like we often argue, you don't have to adapt hook, line, and sinker, but you need to adopt, you know, adjust, and implement, you know, based on your socio-political structure or your socio-cultural dynamics, you know, something that will fit in. As a matter of fact, development or modernization is not a one-size-fits-all. And so there are a lot of gains we are ready. And the gains are mutual. You see, the Chinese will come. We have resources, strategic resources that every country needs in the world. Africa has them. And so part of Chinese gains will be access to strategic natural resources. And if you look at the relationship between China and Africa since the 70s, we have always formed what is known as collectivization in terms of the particular issues.
Just as we round up very quickly, how does Nigeria maximize off of all of that's going on? We know that Nigeria is an African country that has the third largest debt to China. Meanwhile, Nigeria is China's second largest export market in Africa. So as much as some people may say, well, in return, we're getting infrastructure, some are also calling it infrastructural colonization. How does Nigeria maximize off of this relationship? Very quickly, because we have to go.
Well, I'll start from the last, you know, infrastructural colonization. I don't know what that means, but as far as I'm concerned, whatever infrastructure that is built for you, it is for you. It is not run by the Chinese, although the plan of actions have always have what is called the BOT, build, operate, and transfer. And so it is not something that is owned by the Chinese. With regards to debt, you know, the whole idea of the debt trap discourse, it's propaganda. It's like we are quick to forget that in the 1970s and 80s, Africa owed a lot of money to the West, and there was also the discourse on debt trap. And now if you look at our indebtedness to China in comparative sense with our indebtedness to the IMF, the World Bank, and the bilateral trade between bilateral debt between many countries in Africa and the West, you find that Africa's debt to China is just negligible. You know, and so the whole idea of debt trap, it's a myth, you know. But you see, even if you are going to collect loans or financial aid from China and any other country, the most important thing is where that money is channeled into, which has to do with putting the money for the purpose for which it was earmarked for. And so if not, we're not going to gain nothing. We're not going to achieve anything. Yes, I've argued in one of my articles, you know, that, you know, for the past 24 years, you know, our relationship with China has not benefited or has not rendered development to Africa. But again, that is even not the problem of China. It's not either the problem of the West, but our leadership. I heard Dr. Abati talking about consistency, commitment, as well as continuity. And that is one of the major problems within Africa. You know, and which is what the last administration, the President Jonathan's administration talked about in the transformation agenda, that the problem with us is that 3 C's: consistency, continuity, and commitment. You see, African governments need to be consistent. They need to be committed, and there should be continuity. If as one government is leaving, the other continue from where they stop. You know, and that is where the transformation we are all talking about, the modernization, the development we are all talking about will come from. And so we need to put in place proper governance system. And like this President FOCAC is arguing, governance itself is not a one-size-fits-all. You try to develop a system that fits you. And I think that if we're able to do that, there's a prospect for Africa reaching that height that we plan for. You know, that community of shared future we all talk about. You know.
On that note, Professor Ube, would like to thank you very much for joining us on The Morning Show.